As I approach 4 years since my ordination to the priesthood, I think one of the hardest things about being a priest that I did not expect is turning down confirmation sponsor and godparent requests. I imagine many of us know that the church holds sponsors and godparents to a high standard, attending Sunday masses, if married, married in the church, practicing their faith and striving to live a moral life. It's truly heartbreaking for me as a priest when someone is not able to be a godparent for a relative or friend. And I know it's truly heartbreaking for them. It can certainly feel like this denial is a cold, callous, uncharitable response on the part of an overly bureaucratic church. And unfortunately, misunderstandings and the real human failings of priests can perpetuate that perception. Firstly, we have to keep in mind that part of the reason for these requirements is out of concern for providing a qualified and capable spiritual guide for the one to be baptized or confirmed. But I think our readings today are a good reminder that this and other occasions where we are told no, especially by God and the church, can be not a cold denial, but a genuine and necessary expression of love. And while I think it's worth imagining how this encounter in the gospel must have been heartbreaking for Jesus himself, let's think of this gospel from the perspective of the crowd for a minute. A traveling preacher from their own town is going around teaching and miraculously healing. And finally, he comes to visit them, preaches, but performs no miracles. They desire to say to him, "Do here in your native place the things that we heard were done in Capernaum." And he says, no. No prophet is accepted in his own native place. They must have thought, well, with that attitude, no wonder no prophet is accepted in his native place. But why wouldn't Jesus do a few miracles? Well, it seems their attitude and outlook prevented it. Elsewhere, Jesus doesn't perform miracles when faith is lacking. And here, their request, their demands, are not from a place of faith, but from a sense of entitlement. They couldn't understand how one of their own had the audacity to deny them what they saw as their right, that they had more of a right to his miracles than strangers. But Jesus said no. And I think it's easy for us to wonder, why didn't Jesus just give them a couple of miracles? Why didn't he give in, make an exception, do it for his hometown? Especially knowing that when he denied them this request, they would end up trying to throw him off a cliff. It certainly wouldn't have cost him anything. I imagine this is similar to what Jeremiah must have felt in our first reading. God commissioned him to stand up and tell the nations all that God commands him. Jeremiah was told that God's message, and his message is, like the coming destruction of the temple and speaking against the people's sinfulness, would cause the kings, the princes, the priests, and all the people to fight him, but that he was to stand firm. Why couldn't he bring some good news now and then? Why did God give him so much bad news for the people? The answer to why this is sometimes necessary is put beautifully in Paul's letter. Paul says at the start of our reading, "Strive eagerly for the greatest spiritual gifts." This follows from what we heard last weekend, where he orders the spiritual gifts of apostles, prophets, teachers, mighty deeds, healing, assistance, administration, and varieties of tongues. Paul understood that the lower gifts, while flashier, are often fundamentally concerned with the things of this world and are therefore only partial. The gifts of healing that Jesus withheld in his hometown were supernatural, but still ultimately physical gifts. But we are to seek higher, fuller gifts. And the lower gifts only insofar as they lead us to those higher gifts. And Paul is convinced that seeking those higher gifts and leading others to those higher gifts is the truest expression of love. We can see this in a common saying about our prayer requests. It's said that God has only 3 responses to our requests in prayer: yes, not yet, and no, I have something better planned. This is sometimes the something better planned, the higher goods to which we are usually at least partly blind, the higher good of salvation that would not have been helped, but would in fact have been hurt by letting the prideful Nazarene crowd have their way. God said no to the request for miracles in Nazareth for the same reason why the church sometimes says no to our requests, and for the same reason why we are to sometimes say no to requests, not out of anger or unreasonableness, but because love demands it. True love seeks the highest good of the other, their salvation. And with anything less than this true love seeking the highest possible good, we have nothing. All the faith in the world, all the miracles in the world, all the generosity in the world, all the gifts and permissions in the world are nothing but a resounding gong or a clashing cymbal. It is essential that when God tells us no through the church and her rules, through his moral law, or through our unanswered prayers, that we resist the temptation to respond like the crowd and strive to understand that God's no is always out of a love that desires not the small temporary goods that we have our hearts set on, but the eternal good of our salvation, which we should have our hearts set on.